we embarked on a wonderful adventure of setting aside the materials we had been using and seeing if we couldn't develop materials for postmodern philosophy people that we're college student today, and a college student who would be a secondary oral learner. That would be very common. What do you mean by that? Well, you can read, but you don't prefer to learn by reading. Now, a primary oral learner, somebody can't read, but a secondary oral learner is a typical college student. They enjoy having the headphones, plugged into their ears, and they're or talking to their friends. They don't necessarily like to read a long book. And whereas the transcendental concepts of old, developed in 1970, were 64 pages and were considered a brief, succinct, forceful, simple presentation of a concept. Man, 64 pages. So college students today must be a James Michener novel. It's just way beyond what they would read. So anyway, we came down to what you witnessed today as we were going through it. That you lead in an experiential way. Postmodern, more experiences than things. I don't mean that critically. I'm just saying that they out of the fullness of their heart, they then learn. So that I didn't say, what do you think about that statement? That would be a cognitive discussion. I said, so how have you experienced that discussion? Oh man, well I've seen this and that. And so that allowed for the transition where I was able to say, so it is in a relationship with God. None of you would doubt that forgiveness gives a relationship a fresh start. Well, how about with God? Oh man, I never thought about that. Where'd you get that? Well, the Bible. It's an interesting book. It's got a lot of good stuff. And so you bring them in at a point where they're already buying into the lesson. You see, well, I know it's true. So how does that relate to this deal with God? And then we included a story. That's something that's very common, both among postmoderns, but also secondary oral learners. They prefer stories. I mean, how many times do you remember the points of a message? It's 5-10 points. You don't remember those, but you remember the stories in the message. I tried to give a story one time, 10 years after the last time somebody could have heard that story. That was the last time I told that story. Somebody came up at the end and said, I heard you tell that story. I said, that had to be 10 years ago. Well, they remember the story. So there's a story of the woman. What people would take away from this lesson for the most part would be the story of that woman, probably. Even more than maybe 1 John 1:9. And we also use the fact that postmodern secondary oral learners like to learn from their peers. So you all discussed today, and we talked a lot, and you all contributed tremendously to what it is that we learned together. Also, this isn't particularly just postmodern, but all of us benefit from actually making a commitment. But generally speaking, in a society that's sort of fuzzy and things, it's even better to get it down to, okay, so what am I going to do about this specifically? I would say the typical college student today is very concrete. But by the way, I won't limit myself to college students. The typical person today likes to say, so what am I going to do? So what's going to happen as a result of that? And that's why we came down to actually a written action that you talk to somebody about. I mean, you think of what you went through. You had 3 rounds, well 4 actually, if you count just learning the lesson, okay? But then you got it to where you thought of something that you would do in response to that. Then you shared what you were going to do with somebody, and then somebody prayed for you that you would do it. I mean, that's a lot. And then lastly, the importance in spiritual multiplication, this is just one little clue as to where this whole series goes, is that last point, person to tell. You could have a very, very good Bible study, I suppose, if you even got through the point of action to take. I mean, if we talked about the Word of God, we actually applied it to our lives, but you still wouldn't have become a missionary. You wouldn't be multiplying. But actually, my thought is that every single lesson, every single person becomes a person who passes it on. And that has lots of benefits. Number one, you've got them on the other side of the equation. But number two, guess what? When it comes around to them forming a group, who have they been talking to? All these neat truths that they've been sharing with somebody, that's their group. The next time around, it makes it a lot easier. One last thing I'll say, percentage of retention. If you just listened to a lecture, had I lectured you for 45 or 50 minutes, whatever we took on this, you would have retained tomorrow 10%. If I really structured it well, you might retain the main point. Say, if you actually follow through on applying it to your life, and you've already thought a little about how to apply it to your life, but if you actually do that ingrains it in your mind in a different way. And if you actually talk to somebody else about it, you will probably retain 90% of the lesson. If you think about it, 10%, 90%, that is huge. Well, for those reasons, that's why the Bible study is taught the way it is. It didn't cut new ground on content. It's just about assurance, forgiveness, filling, walking, basic stuff, but just how to teach it to people who learn differently than people learned in 1970. That's what this is all about.